The coffee cup slipped from Mayor Ethan Reed's hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. It wasn't the sound that froze the room. It was the image flickering on the television behind his desk. A black woman in handcuffs, cheeks stained with tears, trying not to let her mouth tremble. Her eyes still wide from disbelief. A red headline scrolled beneath her image like a final sentence. Mother of three sentenced to life in prison for possessing unlabeled medication. No one in that office knew that the woman was his wife. No one knew he'd kept their marriage hidden for over a decade, thinking it would protect his rising political career from scandal. And no one, not his aides, not the press, not even himself, could have imagined that just hours later, Ethan would cancel everything, dig out a long-forgotten phone, and call the one woman with enough fire to expose the cruelest judge in the state. Because in that moment, he didn't just lose his wife to a courtroom. He realized he had almost lost his soul to silence. That same morning, under a sky veiled in soft fog, like the city itself couldn't decide whether to wake up or roll over, Angela Reed stepped out of the hospital's side door, her nursing bag slung over one shoulder, her back curved ever so slightly under the weight of too many nights without rest. Her white shoes, now the color of tired bone, tapped gently on the sidewalk. Not hurried, not idle, just practiced. The rhythm of someone who'd long learned that life doesn't wait for the weary. She was 30-something, black, calm-eyed, and the kind of beautiful that no mirror can reflect. The kind that comes from showing up every day, even when no one says thank you. Last night, she'd fallen asleep upright on a plastic chair. That faint shadow on her cheek wasn't makeup. It was a bruise left by her own elbow. Her children, three of them, were still asleep in a cramped apartment, being watched over by a grandmother whose hands now shook too much to open safety cap bottles. Angela had one job left before going home: bring back her mother's heart medication. But the safety seal on the original bottle was impossible for her mother to twist open, so Angela transferred the pills into an unlabeled jar that clicked shut softly in her purse. An act of love so simple, so human, she never imagined it would rewrite her entire life. On the passenger seat, breakfast snacks for the kids. In the glove compartment, a bottle with no label. Quiet, innocuous, harmless, until it wasn't. She was almost home. The streets were still yawn, stretch quiet. She pressed the gas a little, not recklessly, just like any mother anxious to beat the sunrise. Then, sirens. Flashing lights bloomed in her rear view like a rude kind of sunrise. She pulled over, heartbeat steady but sharp. Not fear, familiarity. She knew this story, knew how people like her, black, tired, on their way home, could be stopped not for what they did, but for how they looked doing it. The officer approached, young, white, not angry, not kind, just armed with the confidence of someone who believes he's always right. License and registration? Routine, until he opened the glove box. The bottle rolled out. That soft clack it made on the console sounded innocent, but it was the sound that started everything. No label, he said, frowning. Do you have a prescription for this? Angela shook her head slowly. It's my mother's. She can't open the original cap, so Why not keep it in the original container? She's elderly, her hands tremble. I didn't think. You realize that possession of unlabeled prescription medication is a violation of state code? But I'm not selling it. I wasn't hiding it. I'm going to have to report this. A moment later, he called it in. A standard traffic stop, now elevated to suspicion. Protocol took over. Procedure replaced humanity. She was asked to step out, hands on the hood. Cold metal bit at her wrists. Angela didn't argue. She didn't beg. She didn't even cry. She closed her eyes, not in surrender, but in recognition, as if a switch had flipped. As if, somehow, deep down, she had always known that in a world like this, even love could be a liability, if it came without a label. Courtroom 2B of the county courthouse was always cold, not because of the air conditioning, but because of its pale gray walls, the stark, humming fluorescence above, and the stale scent of paper, ink, and the slow decay of institutional power. It wasn't the kind of cold that raised goosebumps. It was quieter than that, a chill that sank in low, crept under the skin and made even the innocent wonder what guilt might feel like. Angela Reed sat at the defendant's table, her back held straight with the kind of dignity born not of pride, but of necessity. Her hands, thin, tight, woven into each other, gripped an old photograph. Mint, Tyler, and Caleb laughing in the sun, sand clinging to their knees. She wore her Sunday dress, navy blue, modest, the same one she'd worn to church potlucks and school recitals. Today it served as armor, fabric threaded with hope, as if decency alone could soften the blow of judgment. Beside her sat Brent Callahan, her court-appointed attorney. Young, overworked, underslept. He whispered something. "Let me do the talking," or "I'll try my best," but his face betrayed him. He knew. He didn't stand a chance. Then the door creaked open. Judge Gregory Hartman entered. Tall, silver hair. Steel blue eyes, dulled not by age but by overuse. The room rose in unison. He scanned it slowly, not as a man greeting people, but as someone tallying values. And Angela, by all appearances, was worth very little in his book. "Be seated," he said, his voice dry, like paper rubbed against stone. No nod, no pretense of warmth. The prosecutor, a man with a sharp suit and a sharper smile, stood like he'd been rehearsing in front of a mirror. "Your Honor, the defendant was found in possession of an unlabeled prescription bottle in her personal vehicle. No valid script, no original packaging, no proof of origin. It qualifies as illegal possession under code." He held up the pill bottle, now sealed in an evidence bag, like it were a murder weapon instead of what it truly was. A handful of heart pills from a daughter to her mother. Brent stood, his voice wavering, trying to catch water in his hands. "Your Honor, Ms. Reed has no criminal record. She's a nurse, working 2 jobs, raising 3 kids. The medication belonged to her mother, a cardiac patient. The label was removed because her mother couldn't open the safety cap. It was a practical decision, a human one." Judge Hartman made no notes, no questions, no reaction. He looked at Angela, not with anger nor curiosity, but with that hollow stare that came from having made up his mind before he ever entered the courtroom. Angela was called to speak. She rose carefully, her voice soft, but firm. "I know I should have kept the medicine in the original bottle," she said, "but my mom, she can't open it. I had just gotten off my shift. I was rushing home to give her her dose on time. I didn't think of the law. I thought about her heart and my kids. They were waiting for breakfast." Her voice faltered. A few heads in the gallery bowed. But Hartman, still as stone. He removed his glasses, wiped them slowly, like it was a ritual, not a necessity, then leaned into the microphone. "This court," he said, "has grown weary of emotional excuses. You may be a mother, a daughter, a worker, but you broke the law." He paused as if letting the room brace for what it already feared. "The court hereby sentences the defendant, Angela Reed, to life in prison. Eligibility for parole in 25 years. The sound of his gavel was not particularly loud, but it landed like thunder in the chest of every person seated there. Silence blanketed the room. Not even the prosecutor celebrated. He furrowed his brow, as if shocked by the very sentence he'd asked for. Angela didn't scream, didn't beg. She simply froze, mouth parting slightly then closing again. Her lips formed words not meant for the court, but for the clock, for memory, for regret. "Mint. She has her choir recital this afternoon. I promised I'd be there." The sentence dropped into the stillness like a snowflake into a well, and melted quietly into the dark, like a mother's dream torn by a justice system that, ironically, demands labels. The mayor's office on the top floor of City Hall looked, that morning, just as it did every other day. Sunlight poured through the thick glass windows, casting long reflections across the polished wood conference table, bouncing off neatly stacked budget reports, meeting invitations, and a binder detailing the pothole repairs following last night's rain. Everything in place, everything as composed as the man who ran the city. Ethan Reed, mid-40s, salt and pepper hair cropped short, a tailored suit that knew its place, walked into his office with a cup of black coffee in hand. It was his morning ritual, part of the choreography of calm that came with a life full of quiet control. Closed-door meetings, whispered advisories, and scandal avoidance masked as a strategic discretion. He didn't know that in a few seconds, the world he had so carefully curated with silence would shatter, just like the cup in his hand. The television mounted in the corner came to life without warning. His assistant had turned it on out of habit. Morning headlines were wrapping up. Yesterday's controversial case at the county courthouse. Mother of three sentenced to life in prison for possession of unlabeled medication. And then the image appeared. The camera panned quickly, but not fast enough to obscure her face. A black woman in handcuffs, hair unbrushed, her expression caught somewhere between pain and disbelief. Ethan's grip tightened around the cup, his eyes locked on the screen, his lips pressed into a line, his face turned pale. It was Angela, his wife, the woman he had loved in silence, married in secret, the woman who had given birth to their three children in a modest apartment 12 years ago, the woman he once promised, in a whisper only she could hear, "We'll live together, just not in public. No photos, no statements, no scandals. The justice I pursue needs to look clean." Angela never complained. She understood. She agreed. Because she loved him, she stayed quiet. But now she wasn't appearing in a tucked-away wedding photo, not in the lakeside dinners they used to share when the world wasn't looking, not in the safe shadows. She was on the news, in cuffs, with a breaking news banner that screamed and read, "Defendant Angela Reed, life sentence for unlabeled medication." Clink. The coffee cup slipped from his hand and crashed to the floor. The sound wasn't loud, but in that glass-walled office, it might as well have been a gunshot. Coffee bled across the light gray carpet, a dark stain spreading like a quiet wound he could no longer ignore. Ethan didn't move. Neither did his staff. The entire room froze, as if time itself was waiting to hear whether or not he would still breathe. His assistant stepped in, meaning to speak, then stopped cold. Something in his eyes had changed. The calm was gone. The politician was gone. All that remained was a man, broken open. One question pounded in Ethan's head, louder than the headline, louder than the silence. How could I not know? How could she walk into that courtroom alone and never call me? And then the answer came, not in rage, but in grief, because she kept her promise, because she didn't want a scandal, because even in chains she was still trying to protect him, even when he had forgotten how to protect her. Dear friend, how many women have chosen silence out of love, chosen invisibility out of respect for the vision of the man they trust, only to find themselves standing alone in a system too blind to see tenderness? Angela never called Ethan, not out of pride, but because she believed it was a misunderstanding, that justice, if it was truly justice, would never condemn someone for an act of love. But justice didn't come. Now Ethan knew. Justice doesn't arrive on its own. Someone has to name it. Someone has to shatter the silence. And him, the man who once asked his wife to hide their marriage for the sake of political optics, would now have to face the truth. That evening, the mayor's office no longer glowed with the warmth of overhead lights. The hum of printers had stopped, the rhythm of keystrokes silenced. The building had emptied, and now the only illumination in the room came from the faint, bluish glow of a laptop screen, casting its quiet light on the still face of a man who had been sitting motionless for far too long, staring at a photograph he had always kept hidden in the bottom drawer of his desk. Angela and the kids. The picture had been taken 6 years earlier, on a beach at sunset. Angela's hair tinted gold by the dying light. Mint laughing with her whole body. Tyler tossing sand into his mother's lap. And little Caleb gripping Angela's hand as if it were the only thing in the world he could truly trust. Ethan sat hunched forward, his forehead resting against his palm. That photo was the only piece of truth he had kept for himself in a life built on calculation. For years they had lived in parallel, a family in private, strangers in public. A love that was real but invisible to the cameras, to the papers, to the people. No public wedding, no framed portraits, not even a line in his official bio dared mention the name Angela. It had been a mutual agreement, and she accepted it, not out of fear of exposure, but because she loved him enough not to slow his climb. "You don't need me on stage," she once told him. "Just let me be behind you in life. That's enough." And she had kept her word. But what about him? He kept his title, but lost his wife, and somewhere along the way, he lost himself too. Ethan reached for his phone. His hand trembled, but for the first time, he didn't hesitate. He dialed a name he hadn't spoken in years, Jasmine Crockett. Once a fierce prosecutor, now a state legislator, known for her refusal to bend to pressure. The same woman who had challenged Judge Hartman after a racially biased ruling, left her Latino client behind bars, and paid for it with 2 years of stalled career. She picked up on the third ring. Her voice, even this late, was sharp and clear, like a scalpel. "Evening, Mayor. Something tells me this isn't about healthcare funding." Ethan exhaled slowly. "I need help. It's a post-conviction appeal." "I'm not a defense attorney anymore," she replied coolly with no room for small talk. "It's my wife." He barely got the words out. There was a pause, just long enough to feel the weight of it. "Angela, she's your wife?" I kept it quiet, to protect the campaign, the optics. But she was sentenced to life yesterday. Over a bottle of heart medication. No label. Jasmine didn't gasp. She didn't sound shocked. What she said next cut deeper than anger ever could. "And she went to court alone. No lawyer. No call to you. Why?" "She didn't want to hurt me," Ethan whispered. "No, Ethan. She didn't want you to hurt yourself. I made a mistake." "Number, you were silent." "And silence, Ethan. Silence costs blood. The blood of the people we love." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. But the words lit a fuse deep inside him, a fire he had long pretended didn't exist. "I'm going to speak out," Ethan said, throat tightening. "I don't care about my seat anymore. I want my wife home with our kids." "Good," Jasmine replied slowly, like she meant to make each word stick. "But if I help you, this time, you don't get to hide in the wings. You stand next to her, in front of the cameras, in front of the court, in front of the people. No more image management. No more rehearsed silence. Just a husband, fighting for his wife." Ethan closed his eyes. For the first time in his political career, he feared losing a person more than losing a position. And for the first time, he understood something fundamental. A title is something others give you. But character? That's something you build, or betray. That night, while the rest of the city slept beneath a calm sky, a single light burned on the top floor of City Hall. Ethan Reed stood by the window, gazing down at a city he thought he had once known completely. He was preparing to speak a truth he had buried for years, to break the silence that had nearly cost him everything, and to face whatever that truth might demand. But this time, he wasn't afraid, because Angela wouldn't be alone anymore. There are places where time is no longer measured by clocks, but by the clang of metal doors, the shuffle of guard boots on cold tile, and how many times one replays old dreams just to remember they once existed. In cell 17, Block D2, Angela Reed sat with her back against a cracked concrete wall, her hands limp at her sides, resting in the fading flakes of pale paint peeling from the surface. Every day blurred into the next, cold meals with the taste of cheap salt, fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered, and fractured sleep interrupted by the distant screaming of people who had long forgotten what silence felt like. She hadn't cried in weeks. Tears, once the body's instinctive answer to pain, had become a kind of luxury here, a resource more rare than hope. People didn't cry with their eyes anymore. They cried with their backs, with their livers, with the murmurs they whispered into their pillows in dreams they no longer remembered upon waking. It wasn't that she no longer hurt. It was just that the hurt had lived in her too long. It had frozen over, like a lake in winter. She no longer thought about getting out. She didn't let herself picture dinner with the kids, all of them talking at once about their school day. Those images belonged to another life. Now they lived in her like a story that had been forced shut before the last chapter, a book you were made to close mid-sentence without any promise it would ever be finished. Then came Wednesday morning. After roll call, a young guard opened her cell and dropped a pale yellow envelope onto the metal table. No words, no eye contact, just a practiced motion, a routine so mechanical it had forgotten how to hope. Angela didn't move at first. Mail was rare here, too personal to expect, too fragile to believe in. But after a few minutes, her hand reached slowly across the table. Her fingers, dry and stiff from the cold, brushed against something soft. A line of stickers, crooked and colorful, pasted along the edges of the envelope. Hearts, rainbows, a tiny penciled paw print in the corner. And in the middle, scribbled in bright purple marker, "To Mommy from Mint, Tyler, and Caleb." Her hand began to tremble. She opened the envelope slowly, carefully, as if afraid the contents might disintegrate if she moved too fast. Inside was a sheet of lined notebook paper, folded once. On the front, a crayon drawing, three kids holding hands with their mom in front of a small house, a blazing red sun in the sky, and the words, "We love you," floating in a purple cloud. Angela placed her hand over the picture. Her fingertips trembled, not from grief, but from the sudden, overwhelming return of something long forgotten, the feeling of being missed. She unfolded the paper. The handwriting was uneven, uncertain, the pen strokes a little wobbly, but each word landed with the soft power of a whisper from a familiar voice. "Dear Mommy, we miss you so much. I don't know why they won't let you come home. Yesterday I made noodles for Caleb, but I burned them because I'm scared to turn the stove up too high. I did laundry too, but I messed up Tyler's white shirt. It's pink now. Please don't be mad. Caleb cries when he sleeps. Tyler says you're on a special mission. But I know that's not true. I saw you on TV. I told them you didn't do anything bad. I told them you just love people too much. Grandma's back hurts. Grandpa keeps forgetting Caleb's meds. I'll try my best. I'll cook, do laundry, do school. But I'm tired. Please come home. I need you. We all need you. Come home and I'll cook, and you can watch the stove for me, okay? Love." Mint. Angela leaned back, eyes wide open, as if holding them open might stop the tears. But they came anyway, not in sobs, not in gasps, but in slow, silent drops, tears that traced down her cheeks like an underground spring finally breaking through rock. She pressed the letter to her chest. No words, none needed. Somewhere deep within her, a wall began to crack, the same wall she had built to survive, to not feel, to not hope. And through that thin, jagged crack, light was seeping in. Not from the system, not from justice, but from a child, from a 13-year-old girl who didn't use legal terms, didn't make arguments, didn't plead a case. She just wrote, "I'm scared of the stove, but I tried. Please come home." As Angela folded her daughter's letter and held it tightly against her chest like a talisman, somewhere else, at the very top of City Hall, Ethan Reed was doing the same, though not with a letter, but with the quiet ache of a husband who had once chosen safety over truth. He was no longer thinking about donors, headlines, or polls. He was thinking only this: if Angela could be strong enough to endure what she had, then the very least he could do was summon the courage to make it right. This time he didn't hesitate. The phone on his desk didn't taunt him with doubt like it had before. He pressed the name he already knew by heart, Jasmine Crockett. But this time, it wasn't to ask for help. It was to stand beside those who dared to face the truth. He didn't explain. He simply said, "I'm ready to go public. I don't want to protect my seat anymore. I want to protect my wife and everyone like her." Jasmine didn't sugarcoat her reply. "Good. Then we dig. I'll bring someone in." She doesn't flinch, even when a judge is the one in the crosshairs. A few hours later, Sofia Alvarez walked into the mayor's office. Black hair pulled into a no-nonsense knot, eyes sharp as a switchblade, heels clicking against the polished floor like a gavel striking truth. A former federal prosecutor turned civil rights attorney, Sofia had been waiting for this kind of fight for a very long time. "So we're going after Hartman?" she said without a greeting. "Good. I've been waiting 10 years for this." The investigation began the way most real ones do, quietly. They pulled old case files from archives, requested court transcripts, combed through rulings from district courts across the state. They contacted defense attorneys who'd once been cut off mid-sentence by Hartman, tracked down defendants whose voices had been pushed out of courtrooms without anyone listening. Page after dry, lifeless page began to take shape, not as paper, but as evidence, as the living record of a truth too dangerous to stay buried. Late one night, under the cold light of a projection screen, Sophia slid the final stack of data across the table to Ethan. Her voice was soft but unmistakably steady. In the last 5 years, Hartman has presided over 24 major criminal cases with almost identical circumstances. And 82% of those cases involve black or brown defendants. Same charges, same context. But if you're white, you get probation or a fine. If you're not, you go to prison, on average 5 times longer. Ethan leaned back in his chair, not because of the math, but because of the horror that came with realizing he had once believed the system could regulate itself. Sophia tapped the folder, eyes fixed on the screen. This isn't bias. This is policy without paperwork. It's a calibrated injustice, dressed in legal robes, and Hartman's been doing it for years, behind a gavel and a polite smile. You know, sometimes rage doesn't arrive with a scream. Sometimes it comes wrapped in the cold clarity of numbers, data that doesn't tremble when it speaks. And for years, the people who sat through those verdicts, families, public defenders, court staff, said nothing. Not because they didn't care, but because they thought one voice couldn't shake a machine that large. But now, those voices, once scattered, were gathering. Those pages, once dismissed, were becoming hammers. Hammers breaking through the hollow mask that justice had worn for far too long. 8 p.m. The city had already settled into the hush of streetlights and windshield reflections, and those tuning into the evening editorial broadcast had no idea that, within seconds, they would witness a moment that would not only alter the trajectory of a single case, but quite possibly reshape the conscience of an entire generation. The anchor, a familiar face framed by the quiet gravity of nightly news, spoke in a calm, even tone. We've just received breaking news. In an unprecedented move, the mayor of our city, Mr. Ethan Reed, will speak live, uncut and unscripted, about the recent case of Angela Reed, the mother of 3 sentenced to life in prison last week. The screen cut to a modest podium. No banners, no backdrop, no party logos. Just Ethan Reed standing beneath a stark white light, tieless, his face lined with fatigue and eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. He held no notes. There was no teleprompter, just truth, and a kind of remorse that made every carefully prepared speech he'd ever given seem hollow by comparison. I speak to you tonight not as a mayor, not as a politician, he began, voice low but steady. I speak as a husband. He paused, barely a breath. The woman you saw on the news, the one in handcuffs, convicted for carrying an unlabeled bottle of heart medication for her mother, is my wife. The words dropped like an earthquake. There was no dramatic score, no flashing headline, just a man, finally saying what he should have said long ago, and the sound of a voice stripped of spin, trembling with sincerity. We kept our marriage private, he continued. I was afraid of losing my image. I was afraid of losing control. But when she was sentenced, I realized image doesn't feed 3 children. It doesn't undo injustice, and it won't bring freedom back to a woman who only ever meant to love and protect. He drew in a breath, his chest rising slightly as if preparing to shoulder what was coming. I'm sorry, and I won't stay silent anymore. She is not a criminal. She is a good person, and this system got it wrong. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, social media exploded in a way it hadn't in years. News sites pushed notifications at lightning speed. Headlines rolled in, one after another. Mayor breaks silence, confirms wife was wrongfully convicted. Angela is not alone. Nation begins to speak out. Across Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and even the slower corners of the internet where older generations still scroll for news, comments poured in like a tidal wave long held back by fear and fatigue. I was jailed 3 nights over a mislabeled bottle of antibiotics. My mom died behind bars because no one believed the pills in her purse were hers. I don't know, Angela, but I know what it feels like to be looked at like you don't belong. I stand with her. The video surged to the #1 trending slot nationwide in under 45 minutes, not because of algorithms, but because the emotion, long pressed down, finally had a name, finally had a face, finally had permission to speak. People who had once been wrongfully convicted began writing letters by hand. Law students took to public forums, challenging legal precedent. Churches, civic groups, and social organizations organized peaceful marches in cities across the country, holding up photographs of Angela Reed with hand-painted signs that read, "Justice shouldn't come in shades. My mother was just like her." In the heart of downtown, they brought candles, not to grieve, but to rekindle faith. A quiet light meant to warm the belief they thought had been extinguished long ago in courtrooms colder than stone. Monday, 8 a.m., the federal courthouse. Rain fell in a light mist, but the crowd gathered outside Angela Reed's appeal hearing was so large it spilled down the marble steps and onto the sidewalk. They weren't there for spectacle. They came because they carried their own stories in their chests, each one a scar, each one a reason they could no longer stay silent. Inside, every seat in the courtroom was taken. In the front row, Angela's 3 children sat shoulder to shoulder, their small hands clasped tightly. Lorraine, Angela's mother, frail but resolute, had come despite the strain. On opposite sides of the defense table stood Jasmine Crockett and Ethan Reed, their eyes razor sharp, hollowed by a week without rest, but burning with purpose. At the center of the room, Sofia Alvarez stepped to the podium. She didn't begin with rhetoric. She pressed play. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly and the screen came alive, not with a reenactment or a documentary clip, but with the raw, unedited footage from Angela's original trial. There she was, a black woman trying to explain herself, her voice calm but urgent. And there was Judge Hartman, white, stone-faced, interrupting her mid-sentence. The clip captured her final plea. "My daughter has a choir recital this afternoon." It hung in the courtroom like a last breath held too long. Sophia turned toward the jury, her voice unwavering. "I'm not here to ask for sympathy. I'm asking you to compare." She raised another file, another video. The screen changed to show a white man in his 50s, arrested for carrying 3 unlabeled prescription bottles. His defense was nearly identical. "They're for my mother. She can't read the labels." The verdict: probation, no fine. A warning. Sophia stepped closer, her voice now lower, steadier, heavier. Not a lawyer's voice, but something older, like the toll of a bell from a long-forgotten church. Angela got life. He got to go home. Why? Same crime, same explanation, same country. The only difference is skin. The air in the courtroom thickened. Not a shuffle, not a cough. Even the pens were still. And in that silence, truth stood up, pulled itself out of the shadows and took the floor. Sophia continued, "I call our final witness, Mrs. Lorraine Jackson." Angela's mother rose, 72 years old, her white hair tucked neatly beneath a shawl, one hand gripping her cane, but her eyes sharp as ever. And her voice, it cut clean through the polite pretense of justice like a blade. "She only brought medicine home for me. She didn't sell it. She didn't hide it. She just helped a mother." Her voice wavered, and then she nodded slightly, as if bowing to something bigger than the room. "And if that's a crime, then my whole heart deserves to be sentenced too." In that moment, the spectators weren't just an audience. They were witnesses, jurors of conscience. And if they chose silence now, they would become accomplices to something much darker than law. The chief judge, a man known for being firm, stoic, and rarely emotive, didn't lift his eyes. Instead, he lowered them slowly to the folder in front of him. His voice, when it came, was deliberate, almost tender, as though each word cost him something to speak. "Having reviewed the full case file and the newly submitted evidence, this court declares the prior sentence against Angela Reed nullified. Angela Reed is to be released immediately." No one moved. Because emotion didn't rise as a cheer, it settled into the room like air returning to lungs. Angela, her face wet with quiet tears, didn't sob or collapse. She simply turned toward her children and nodded, as if to say, "I kept my promise. I made it in time." Ethan clenched his fists. Jasmine closed her eyes and tilted her face skyward, like a soldier who had finally seen the sun after a long, brutal night. Sophia said nothing. She walked quietly to Angela, placed a hand on her shoulder, not to congratulate, but simply to say, "Thank you for not breaking. Today, justice has your face." The prison gates opened in the soft light of late afternoon, the kind of golden hour when the sun no longer blazes, but gently fractures into warm streaks across the cracked cement, laying down a quiet carpet of welcome. Angela Reed stepped out. No handcuffs, no guards flanking her. Just a small worn bag slung over her shoulder and a deep, deliberate breath, as if she were finally inhaling the world she had only dreamed about through iron bars. There was no banner, no announcement, only the sound of children's feet beating joyfully against the pavement, arriving before even the breeze. From beyond the fence, her three kids came flying toward her, like wind wrapped in love, a kind of love that needs no reason, no rehearsal. Mint was first, her hair loose, her cheeks flushed pink from crying and smiling all at once. Tyler and Caleb followed close behind, their legs moving so fast they nearly tumbled. Angela dropped to her knees, not because she was weak, but because it was the only way to hold them all at once. Her arms closed around them like an apology, a promise, and a miracle fulfilled. "You're home, Mommy." "Really home," Mint whispered, tears soaking into the collar of Angela's shirt. Angela didn't answer. She pressed her cheek into her daughter's hair, breathing in the scent of home, the old sunlight, the worn cotton, the love that had waited patiently behind every locked door. From the edge of the scene, Ethan Reed approached. Not fast, not grandly, but gently, as if not to disturb the sacredness of the moment. Angela looked up. They met each other's gaze like two people who had walked through war and arrived intact enough to still be recognized. Without a word, Ethan opened his arms, and Angela stepped into them. For the first time, they embraced in public. No more hiding, no more masks, not for the media, not for reputation, but because it had simply been too long. Time passed with no footsteps, no announcement that healing had begun. But one autumn morning, when the leaves outside turned a deeper shade of amber, a small headline in the local paper stirred something new in the hearts of those who read it. Angela Reed, formerly wrongfully convicted, launches Justice for All with her husband, former Mayor Ethan Reed. It wasn't a gleaming nonprofit headquarters, no sprawling budget. Their office was a worn red brick building tucked between aging laundromats and corner stores in a neighborhood like the one where Angela had once waited for justice that never came. They didn't choose it to impress. They chose it so they'd never forget where they came from. In their first year, Angela gave no interviews. She didn't chase headlines. She and Ethan worked alongside a team of young attorneys, reopening file after forgotten file, every sentence handed down by Judge Hartman when no one had been watching. 78 cases, 78 stories, 78 lives. They met fathers still behind bars for sleeping pills, mothers who had lost custody because of clerical errors, children who grew up with no one at the school gate. And in each face, Angela saw a version of her own. Not a criminal, but a mother stripped of her name. Every time she signed a motion for appeal, she didn't do it as a founder. She signed like someone sending a letter to the world, whispering, "Someone still cares." 1 year to the day after her release, Angela stood on a small stage in the city's Central Park, where her organization hosted its first community celebration. There were no barriers, no security detail, just soft lights, wind rustling through the trees and a sea of eyes looking up at her, not with expectation, but with quiet hope. Angela didn't deliver a speech. She held the microphone, took a slow breath, and let the same voice that once trembled in a courtroom now rise. Clear, composed, unmistakably steady. "I was once a victim. Today I am someone walking ahead to clear the path. And I stand here to say this. No one gets forgotten anymore. No one." The applause didn't erupt. It rolled wave by wave, like gratitude finding its voice. Like people saying, without words, "We hear you, and we remember." After the event, in a quiet room behind the stage, Angela opened a small mailbox, the kind they had set up for messages from the community. Inside was a folded piece of paper from Mint. It was written in that familiar, growing-up handwriting, now steadier, now braver. You promised you'd come home. You kept that promise. Now we'll help bring others home too. Not just home, but back to justice, back to truth, back to who they really are. Some losses can never be reversed. Some wounds never fully close. But when a scar becomes a lantern, when it helps someone else find their way out of the dark, it is no longer just pain. It becomes purpose. Angela never went looking for justice just for herself. She planted it with what she had to give, with everything she once had to lose. And maybe, just maybe, that is the simplest definition of justice we have left.